Okay, so we're starting off for Lent. I'm not going to do Ash Wednesday readings because I just don't have time to make two sets of videos in the same week. So I'm gonna skip the stuff for Ash Wednesday and go right to Lent 1, which will be for Sunday, February 18th. And so we'll start with the Gospel from Matthew 4. It's the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness. This is one of my very favorite passages. So one of the reasons this reading is used during Lent is because Jesus was fasting. And so during the season of Lent, Christians since the time of Christ have taken the season of Lent to do fasting and almsgiving, giving extra money to the poor, people who don't have the means to support themselves, and having a special discipline of prayer. So prayer, fasting, and alms are the three traditional disciplines for the season of Lent. And so this Matthew chapter 4 passage shows up because Jesus is fasting here for 40 days. And so we fast because Jesus fasted. So there's three temptations after the fasting. And what happens before we get that? What happens when we engage in spiritual disciplines, like when we worship regularly, when we go to the Word and study it regularly, when we fellowship with other believers in the Spirit of Christ regularly, when we start obeying what God wants us to do, the devil notices that and he attacks. And so Jesus spent 40 days fasting, which presumably meant that he was in very deep communion with the Father. And then all of a sudden Satan shows up. And so when we start obeying Christ and when we take on spiritual disciplines, we can expect that there is also going to be satanic attack, because the devil doesn't want us to obey Christ or to do the things that Christ has invited us into, to be part of his kingdom. So the tempter comes, and the first command is, or the first temptation is, command that these stones become bread. Jesus hasn't eaten anything for 40 days. And so obviously, as the creator of everything, Jesus could have commanded the stones to become bread, and they would have done anything that he wanted. And so the temptation here that Satan wanted Jesus to fall into was, be comfortable, satisfy your needs. Gosh, aren't you hungry? You just did this really incredible thing, 40 days of fasting. That's amazing. You should satisfy your own need for hunger. Hey, here's some stones, turn them into bread. You can. Why not be comfortable? And so that's what Satan wants us to do too, to stop doing spiritual discipline and to focus only on what would make us comfortable, when mostly the way of the cross is very uncomfortable for us. It's hard to fast, it's hard to pray, it's hard to come to worship on Sunday, it's hard to read the Bible, especially if you feel like you don't understand it, or it's not connecting with you, or you just feel overwhelmed by how big it is. The devil is going to come to you and say, don't worry about it. Just be comfortable. Do what's easy. Satisfy your own needs. You deserve that, right? You're a good person. Look at all this stuff that you've done. And so that's the temptation that he tried to use on Jesus. These 40 days of fasting, my goodness, make yourself comfortable. Do something nice for you. And so Jesus responds by saying, there's no point in satisfying our physical needs if our spiritual needs aren't being met. So he says, we don't live on bread alone. Our lives are not about meeting our own physical needs. The most important thing about a human being is that we're taking care of our spiritual needs by obeying God and being in communion with Him and doing whatever it is He wants us to do. Praying, fasting, reading His Word, worshiping, fellowshipping with other believers. Taking on a special discipline of almsgiving or doing a devotional with the church during Lent, something like that. Jesus says physical needs is really just not the most important thing. Taking care of spiritual needs is the most important thing. And so that was temptation number 1. Temptation number 2, throw yourself off the temple. Be reckless, sensationalize, make yourself a spectacle. You could do it, right? You're the creator of the world. You've got all this power. Show off a little. What can you do? Let's see it. And he could have. God would absolutely have come to, rescue him or sent angels to rescue him. But the point, Jesus says, is don't demand of God what you yourself should do. We need to be responsible for ourselves. We don't act in reckless ways. We don't act in sensational ways. We don't put God to the test, by doing things that are just absolutely ludicrous, clearly not good for us, and not in line with God's desire for how His people should behave or act. And so we don't need to make a spectacle of ourselves. We don't need to be reckless and foolish. We need to be responsible. Don't go up on a high roof and jump off and expect that God's going to save you. Get down from there. Be on the ground. Be a regular person. And so the temptation for Christ was to show off His power, and He doesn't need to do that. His first coming to earth was not what that was about. That's why He kept saying to people, and don't tell anybody what I just did for you. It's not my time. His second coming, all bets are off. And He is going to come in majesty and glory like we have never seen before. That will be sensational. It will be terrifying, but it will be sensational. The time for Him is His second coming. And it won't be reckless, but it will be all of His majesty revealed. And so the devil was trying to get Him to use His power in a way that is just not glorifying to God. And we can't use our power either in ways that aren't glorifying to God. We need to think about what is the responsible thing here, and does this honor God? Third temptation, I'm going to give you everything. And what's interesting is, does the devil have the right to offer to Jesus the kingdoms of the world? In a way, he does. The kingdoms of the world, Satan is called the prince of this world, right? Nations bow to him. Evil people do what he wants. He kind of has a lot of influence and grasp of people and powers and principalities on earth. There's a lot of systems and people who belong to Satan. And Satan says, I will give you all of this if you bow to me. And the thing about that is that ultimately he's already defeated. From Genesis 3 and the fall of man, God had already planned to send Jesus as a redeemer of the world, to restore everything to its original created state, and Satan's time is limited. And so sure, he can offer power and kingdoms at this point, but not forever, not the way Jesus can. And so he usurped his place. this temptation is about taking shortcuts. The way for Jesus to inherit all of the kingdoms is to be obedient to his Father, and his Father needed him to come to earth, take human flesh, suffer, and die. And the devil is saying, you don't have to do that. Here, I'll just give you all of the ones that don't already bow to you. They bow to me, but you bow to me, and I'll give you everything I've got. Don't worry about the cross. You don't have to do that. Just take this shortcut. Don't have any integrity. Don't worry about God's plan. Make your own plan. Just do this little thing. Just bow to me, and I will give you all of the stuff that doesn't already belong to you. And that's the temptation for us too. Don't go through pain. Oh my gosh. It's kind of like the first one again. Don't be uncomfortable. Don't suffer. Gosh, just God doesn't really mean it, He doesn't need you to suffer. I can give you everything and you won't have to suffer. Ooh, my light just turned off in here. I'm in a room that has motion lights. And so the temptation then is to invert the order of authority. God has the authority over our lives. We don't get to say, I'm not going to suffer. I don't want to do that. God says, well, no, that's my plan, for you to walk through this trial or this hard thing so that you are obedient to me, and so that then I can bless you, and so that my purpose can be fulfilled. Not that every painful or hard thing is from God for our benefit or for the kingdom, because the world is fallen and sometimes painful, awful things just happen. But in a temptation way, we are so often tempted to not follow the will of God, but to skip the hard things and just want the benefit. And Jesus says, no, we're not going to do that. Jesus knew at this point that he was going to have to go to the cross. And he's like, get behind me. You are not tempting me to sidestep what is necessary in order for me to redeem the whole creation. So we don't put ourselves in the place of God. Jesus didn't. And so this is a pretty powerful passage about surrender, about God's plan, about pain and self-denial. And all of these are really good lessons for us during the season of Lent, when we are supposed to be focusing on the suffering of Christ, and entering into that by our own choices, to have things be uncomfortable, to have things not be our way, and to offer that up to Christ, to say, I recognize what you've done for me, and I choose the way of suffering also. So it's hard. It's impossible. It's impossible, which is why we ask Jesus to do it for us.